Well, hello and welcome to the On It Not In It interview series podcast. I'm your host, Todd, and today I'm joined by John Rampe, who is the president and CEO of Torque Transmission. John, thank you so much for joining us. Would you like to kick us off with a brief background as to who you are and what you do?
Well, thank you, Todd. I appreciate being on the podcast. My name is John Rampe. I'm the president of Torque Transmission, and we are a manufacturer of power transmission components. Our specialty is fractional horsepower applications. So if you think about the movement of a garage door or an MRI table, there are gearboxes and pulleys that move those items. We are the manufacturers of the gearbox and the pulleys. So everything we make is normally behind the scenes, but coupled with an electric motor.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks, John. I think a lot of people, when they hear the word transmission, think car, right? They think truck. But there's a lot of motors in the world that need transmissions to move things without having jerky motions, right? And that's what
That is correct.
That's what you're doing with your technology, which is really cool. Thanks for sharing that. So you mentioned your manufacturer. Prior to our starting, we talked about small business. So could you share a little bit about why you chose to work and run a small business versus running in maybe a bigger organization? You know, the big corporate monsters, the GEs or the the Boeings of the world. Why did you choose to work in the small business world?
Well, this is one that kind of snowballs. You start out much younger, little out of college, and you answer an ad in the paper back when we had newspapers, and you get a job working in the sales department. And you just start working your way up and keep finding opportunity after opportunity. And all of a sudden, opportunity arises to become the president and take the overall lead of the organization. And somehow I've enjoyed this path and the snowballing of one job to another. And in a small business, you don't really just wear one hat, you wear multiple hats. So all of a sudden it becomes very natural to jump from one position to another.
Yeah, John, thanks for sharing that. I really appreciate it. I think many times our graduates, our folks entering the workforce think, oh, I want to get a job in a big business because there's a lot of career opportunities in these big businesses. And what I think they don't always realize is there's a lot of opportunity in the small business world, because when you join as a salesperson, you might be doing 4 different roles, even though your number one is sales, and you get this broader education, you get this broader opportunity to kind of learn all the things in business and all the different parts and components. And your journey is similar to mine. I was also a small business guy coming out as an engineer. And I think it's really good for our listeners to hear that there's a lot of opportunity in the small business world. In the small business, it's not a small family business, meaning sometimes it is family owned, but oftentimes it's a small business family, right? You're around the same people for 10, 20, 30 years, and you become a family, friends. And it's
100%.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's a security that people think the big company offers, but that's not always the case, because small business owners, I think, really think twice, or small business leaders really think a lot more when things are hard. If I let somebody go, I'm going to have a hard time finding someone to replace that knowledge and that information and all that investment I've made. Whereas big business, it's about the dollars and cents, and things get bad, people get cut. So I think that's really important for our listeners to hear your story a little bit. Thanks for sharing that.
My pleasure. My pleasure. And as you mentioned, the tribal knowledge gained by somebody who's been at an organization for 20 to 30 years is immense. And when they leave, you can document a lot, but you don't get it all. And it's hard.
Yeah. So obviously we're talking a little bit about some of the misconceptions that people have about working in small business. I want to hear about some of your misconceptions. Like when you joined, you probably had some ideas of what it was going to be able to work there. And then maybe even when you're offered the presidency, you thought some things were going to be certain ways. There's probably some reality that checked in. So what were some of your misconceptions that you've learned along the way, John?
Probably the biggest misconception I had when I started was the fact that I'm going to be doing sales. And as you mentioned, I was wearing a few other hats. I was getting into marketing. I was getting into lead generation. And I was also doing inside and outside sales. So I'm overseeing everything in an area I had just a little experience in. And it was quite new.
Yeah. So being open to doing something that maybe you're not educated to do, but you need to learn it, right? Because obviously we go through a college education, or maybe we don't, we just go through a trade school or coming out of high school. We have an education level, but the real education happens in the workforce, right? And so being open to new things.
100%. College is great, but the education happens once you put a pen in your hand and sit down at a desk and listen to somebody on how to solve a problem. And that's where education starts once you start your job.
Yeah, I totally understand that, John. And again, like I said, we have a lot of similar backgrounds. I know in my own career, I was a COO, and there were times when I had to sit in the CFO chair as well as the chief commercial officer chair. And I was not qualified to do that, but I had to figure it out. So it was interesting. But well, thanks. So you've been doing this for a while. How many years have you been with Torque?
I've been here at Torque Transmission for 16 years now.
Okay. Yeah. So 16 years there. So what are your biggest challenges today that your company's facing?
Probably the biggest challenges we face, and this is not unlike anybody else, labor. Labor is probably the toughest item we are working with on a daily basis. We want to find and retain a good labor force. And as you mentioned earlier, in a small business, it's a family. And, part of what we do is try to find people who fit well into our culture of being a work family. And if they don't, we can tell right away, they just don't fit. So that's probably our biggest issue we're dealing with. The second one is, of course, new business sales. Money just doesn't fall off the tree, and you've got to go and hunt and find customers. When you're a smaller organization, you just don't have the big dollars and cents to push massive marketing campaigns or have multiple people cold calling or blast emailing everybody. So you've got to be very specific and targeted on all your marketing efforts.
Yeah, and it sounds like when you mentioned some of the places where you serve, like an MRI table you mentioned in the very beginning, that's a pretty niche application for transmission, obviously. So you probably start to get known in that industry, but there's only so many people that make MRI machines, right? That's kind of your point.
Correct. And, it's funny, they all do it a little differently.
Yeah, that's and that's, you work in a technical industry. What you build is a technical product, and so the people that work on your manufacturing floor, they're skilled labor. They're not just button pushers, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so finding the right and retaining the right is very, very important to your organization. So,
yeah, our goal is to get people who, next to taking full accountability and ownership of the job, want to think about how to make it better. As much as button pushers are great, they don't solve problems. And we want to make sure everybody we have here, no matter what level, no matter their tenure, they're problem solvers.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing that. So we talked a little bit about your organization. I want to talk about the outside forces impacting your business. So one thing's certain in the world of business is things are always changing, right? Yeah. We've lived through a pandemic recently, but we had a couple of economic cycles that have been down, up, down, up. So the clear thing there is business landscape is always evolving and changing. And we must evolve, change, and innovate along the way. So what are some strategies that you guys use at Torque to stay innovative and make sure that you're keeping up with the trends?
To be honest, that's a tough one to say we're keeping up with the trend. I'd always say we're probably just a little behind. One, due to, I like to see what other people are doing and how well it's working before we invest or chase something. And two, if it looks good, we want to make sure we save up so we're not incurring too much debt. Yes, the dogs are upset. Somebody's at the front door. The joy of a small business, you get to bring your dogs to work.
Yeah. So anyways, you were mentioning that when it comes to innovation and the industry change that happens, is that you're a little bit behind because you want to see what happens in the world. So you can't afford to take on every single new thing coming through. You need to vet it before you bring it into your business, right?
100%. 100%. Yeah, I hate to add on something and then find out that really at the end of the day, the new technology is not going to benefit us, or we really need to invest much further to make it all work.
Can you go a little bit more into that? I apologize. I just interrupted you.
We haven't really dealt with it, but the addition of 3D printers, a great item. But they've evolved so much so quickly. We've been taking our time, and finally we're getting to the point to purchase one. Well, now we've got a very good idea of what we want, and the quality and the technology has improved so immensely. I don't worry about buying something that is 2 years old and already obsolete.
Yeah, no, and that's a great example, John, because I have an engineering background as well. And when 3D printers first came out, it was really just a concept like, hey, I want to take my 3D model and produce it into something I can touch. Today, you can buy 3D printers that are capable of making manufactured parts, right? Exactly. Components that can be used in your products.
Exactly.
I would never have imagined that back when they first came out, because I remember feeling and touching them that they didn't have the surface finish that you might need on a machined part. And man, today they're amazing.
Or nor the strength, the strength, the tensile strength, the yield strength, or the finish. So, it's a great prototyping, but you can't sell it.
Yeah, and the materials that they can now 3D print with are vastly different than what used to be
Yes,
when it
they
first
are.
came out. Right. So
Yes,
yeah, so all of that, that's a great point. And so if you jumped into the 3D printing world early, may not have hurt you, but you would have made an investment that might not have been good for the business. And so I think that's really good for. Go ahead. I'm sorry, John.
and that's the way we were looking at it. It would have been great to add, but probably wouldn't have yielded what we wanted.
Yeah, and so I think that you're talking about a little bit. So any kind of technology, there's an adoption curve in any technology. When the iPhone first came out, there were people that jumped out and bought the iPhones right away. There was a lot of people that sat back and said, "I want to see what happens with this thing before I buy one." And yet now they dominate the world market when it comes to the cell phones out there. And so I think that's what you're talking about is, hey, you just don't want to be the early adoption. You want to let that curve pick up a little bit, see what the technology is doing, how it's really going to impact your business, and then make what I would call a wise or smart investment as a small business.
Exactly. And that's you hit the nail on the head. That's exactly what we do and why we do it.
Yeah. So let me ask this question as a follow-up to that. So can you give us some of you mentioned the 3D already, but is there an example where if you had jumped in early, you might have hurt your company badly, or is there an example where by waiting you got a pickup from it? With an example, a different one.
Probably jumping in early, we could have only used it for just rough prototyping, mainly because it doesn't have the materials, wouldn't have the strength or the surface finish, as you mentioned, or the machine finish. Now that they do, we're able to prototype and it can go right into a testing system. Well, anybody who prototypes, they want to start testing. They just don't want to say, yeah, it fits great. Can you make one that's actually going to hold up in testing?
Yeah. Okay. Good example. I don't want to beat that one down, but I think it's important for other small business owners and operators to understand that just because it's a new technology, you don't have to jump in, and technology takes time to develop, and it's the early adopters that really hone. Now, yes, they can sometimes yield the greatest results quickest, but in small business, we have to really pay attention to the things where we invest our money. And I think that's what you're talking about.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, every penny counts. And you've got to be wise where you put it.
Awesome. So I always share this one without revealing any secrets or about any specific things. Is there anything you could share about any future plans for the business? Maybe some goals, maybe what you envision for the next chapter at Torque Transmission. New product, not anything that's intellectual property, but anything like that.
Really, probably the direction we're going to keep going is, as I mentioned, we do some work in the medical field. Is our expansion in the medical field, and can we get into other areas that might use a different type of material, high temp resins, things of that nature. Still a little long term. We still have a lot of R&D work to do and testing internally before we can get there. But I believe it's more of the future than it has been.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I think for those out there listening, if you think about, there's always these things in the world that are called these challenges that happen in the workforce. What you're looking at is you're saying, where are the opportunities and the challenges? Those that don't do well look at the challenges and say, this is a problem I can't control. They become the victim instead of the victor. It's the victors that win. So, and I think that's what you're talking about a little bit, John, is how do we press into some space that we're familiar with, but do the right things?
100%, Todd.
Excellent. So as we're one final question for you, I want you to think about maybe someone that's maybe coming out of school. Give us your best pitch and advice for why small business might be the right way to go in your career versus going into the big deal, or maybe what's the reason why they should start their own business instead of going to work for somebody else? Any advice that you would have?
Well, probably the biggest advice I can have is don't be shy to find a job and work it and do all the things you don't want to do. Because the education from everything you don't want to do at a job will just make you a far better person in the marketplace for future employment. And once you hit a point where you've done numerous things in a business, you might want to venture into starting your own. You might have a great idea. All I can say is find great mentors or coaches to help you along. They've succeeded and they've failed, and they're going to do everything they can to ensure you succeed by their knowledge.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks, John. I appreciate you sharing that. You're okay.
Yeah,
I'll see. Yeah. So, hey, John, I want to thank you again for joining us today. It was great to meet you, hear a little bit about your experience of running a small business. And to everyone watching and listening, we look forward to seeing you on our next episode. Thanks again, John.